On the far edge of the galaxy, there was a burning world called Dragon Prime. The air shimmered with heat, and rivers of fire flowed between black mountains. At the center of this world lived the Dragon King, a creature so old that no one remembered when he was born. His scales shone like molten gold, and his eyes were deep and wise. He ruled not just with power, but with a strange sadness. For centuries, beings from many worlds came to face his great trial. They came seeking honor, fame, or the promise of alliance with the mighty Dragon King. But none ever passed. The trial was said to test not only strength, but the spirit within. Warriors from alien empires, champions of machines, and even the strongest beasts had all tried. They fought, they roared, and they fell. Each left the arena broken and defeated. Some were burned, others lost their minds, and a few never returned. The Dragon King did not rejoice in their failure. Each time another warrior fell, his great wings lowered a little more. He had seen too much pride and too little heart. Long ago, laughter had vanished from his world. Across the galaxy, the stories of his impossible trial spread like fire. To humans, it became a legend told in the halls of military academies and among the crew of starships. Some laughed at it, calling it just another alien myth. But others believed. They said the Dragon King's trial was a test of truth itself. On Earth, far from the stars, a young stable boy named Ethan Cole listened to these stories while working at a spaceport. He brushed the coats of alien mounts and cleaned their stalls, dreaming of distant worlds. He had never held a weapon or worn armor. Still, something about the story of the Dragon King made him wonder. Ethan was not a hero or a fighter. He was quiet and often overlooked. The soldiers and pilots who visited the stables called him kid or boy. But Ethan had a patient heart. He listened more than he spoke, and he noticed things others ignored. When a tired soldier complained about the weight of his armor, Ethan simply smiled and offered water. When an alien beast snarled in pain, Ethan spoke softly to calm it. There was a kindness in him that made others feel at ease, even if they didn't understand why. One day, word spread through the spaceport that a delegation from Earth would travel to Dragon Prime. The Dragon King had agreed to allow humans to attempt his trial for the first time. The team would include the best soldiers, scientists, and diplomats Earth could send. Ethan overheard their plans as he cared for their mounts. When the captain saw how well Ethan handled the animals, he asked him to come along to tend them during the journey. Ethan accepted, though he did not know that this trip would change his life forever. The journey to Dragon Prime was long and strange. Ethan spent most of his time in the cargo bay, cleaning, feeding, and watching the stars pass by through a small round window. The warriors trained every day. They spoke proudly of the glory they would win when they faced the Dragon King. Ethan sometimes watched them spar, but their talk of battle made him uneasy. He did not like the way they laughed at the stories of those who had failed before. He wondered if pride could really defeat an ancient being who had seen thousands of warriors come and go. When the ship finally reached Dragon Prime, the heat hit them like a wave. The ground was black and cracked, glowing red beneath the surface. The air smelled of ash and iron. The Dragon King's great temple rose in the distance, built from obsidian and firestone. Streams of lava lit the sky with orange light. Even the strongest soldiers trembled at the sight. Ethan stayed close to the mounts, trying not to draw attention. He was just a stable boy after all. The first human warrior entered the trial. The Dragon King watched from his throne of burning rock. His voice echoed across the arena like thunder. "Show me the strength of your world," he said. The warrior charged forward, his armor shining, his blade humming with energy. But when the Dragon King spoke again, the ground itself rose against the human. Fire and shadow swallowed him whole. The others watched in horror. One after another they entered the trial, and one after another they failed. By the end of the day, smoke filled the sky. The humans had been defeated just like all the others before them. The Dragon King turned away, his great wings folding around him like a cloak. "No heart, only hunger," he said softly to himself. Ethan heard those words as he led the tired mounts back to shelter. He did not know why, but those words stayed with him. He looked at the temple and thought of the sadness in the Dragon King's voice. Perhaps, he thought, the trial was never about winning or losing. Perhaps it was something else entirely. That night, as the stars shone faintly through the heat clouds, Ethan sat beside a pool of molten water. He could still hear the echo of the Dragon King's roar and see the fear in the warriors' faces. But he also remembered the small moment when the great beast had sounded almost human. Lonely, weary, and longing for something he had lost long ago. Ethan did not yet know it, but destiny was watching him. And soon, even a simple stable boy would step into the fire that no warrior could endure. The next morning, the sun rose weakly over Draconix Prime. The air shimmered with heat, and the red sky looked like fire stretched across the heavens. The human camp stood near the edge of the Dragon King's temple. The warriors moved slowly, their pride broken by failure. The scientists studied the readings from their machines, but none of the data could explain how the trial had ended. The Dragon King had shown them illusions, storms, and living shadows that their instruments could not record. Nothing they had brought from Earth could make sense of this place. Ethan Cole woke up early. He fed the mounts and brushed their hides, though his hands shook a little. He kept thinking about the Dragon King's voice. It had been deep and powerful, but there was something lonely in it too. He had heard it clearly when everyone else had been afraid. Ethan did not understand why he felt sorry for such a mighty creature, but he did. Maybe no one had ever listened to the Dragon King, only tried to fight him. The human commander, Captain Lewis Grant, walked through the camp, his face hard and his armor scorched from the trial. He had been the last to face the Dragon King and had nearly died in the flames. "We return to the ship at dusk," he said firmly. "No more lives will be wasted here." The others nodded in silence. They were tired, ashamed, and afraid. Ethan wanted to say something but didn't. He was only a stable boy. No one would listen to him. Instead, he packed the supplies and cleaned the feeding stalls. As he worked, he kept glancing toward the temple. The black stone walls glowed faintly with heat, and a strange wind carried the sound of breathing slow, heavy, and ancient. The Dragon King was awake. While the others prepared to leave, Ethan stayed behind with one of the mounts that had gone lame. It was a large, four-legged creature with rough scales and gentle eyes. As he bandaged its leg, he heard footsteps behind him. When he turned, a tall draconian guard stood there, armored in obsidian plates. The guard's eyes glowed like embers. "The king wishes to see one of your kind again," the guard said. "He demands no warriors." Ethan blinked. "No warriors? Then who?" The guard looked at him carefully. "He spoke of the one who tends the beasts, the one who listens." Ethan's heart began to pound. "Me? But I'm not." "The king waits," the guard interrupted. Ethan looked back toward the camp. The humans were busy loading crates and repairing equipment. No one noticed him. He took a deep breath, wiped his hands on his shirt, and followed the draconian toward the temple. His boots crunched on the black sand. The heat grew stronger with every step until the air itself seemed to burn his lungs. Still, he walked on. Inside, the temple was vast and glowing. Rivers of fire flowed through stone channels, lighting the walls with red and gold. Statues of ancient dragons lined the path, their eyes made of jewels that shimmered in the heat. At the end of the hall, the Dragon King sat upon his throne. His scales gleamed like molten metal, and his wings folded behind him like mountains of gold. When he breathed, the air trembled. Ethan stopped a few steps away and bowed awkwardly. Hello, Your Majesty," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to bother you." The Dragon King's eyes opened slowly. "You are the small one," he said in a deep voice that rolled like thunder. "The one who does not fight." "Yes, sir," Ethan replied, his voice shaking a little. "I just take care of the animals. I'm nobody important." The Dragon King studied him for a long moment. "All who come here seek power. They bring pride, rage, or fear. But you carry none of these." Ethan hesitated. "I guess I don't have much to be proud of. I just try to help where I can." The Dragon King leaned closer. His great golden eye filled Ethan's vision. "Tell me, little human, Why do you serve those who failed? Ethan swallowed hard. Because they needed help. Everyone fails sometimes. Maybe they just need a little kindness. The Dragon King was silent. A low rumble passed through the ground. Not of anger, but thought. Kindness? He repeated softly, as if tasting the word. It has been long since I heard that. For a moment, neither spoke. The heat roared quietly between them. Then Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of fruit he had saved from breakfast. A bright orange sphere that smelled sweet even in the burning air. He held it out awkwardly. You, want to try one? It's from Earth. The Dragon King stared at the tiny offering. The gesture was so simple, so strange, that it broke something deep inside him. He reached out a claw the size of a tree and gently picked up the fruit. It vanished between his sharp teeth in a single bite. For the first time in ages, his face softened. It is sweet, he said. Ethan smiled a little. Yeah, most good things are if you give them a chance. The Dragon King let out a sound that was almost like a sigh. You are different, human. Perhaps your kind has not forgotten what others lost. He rose slowly, his massive wings unfolding, casting shadows across the hall. Return to your camp. Tomorrow you will face my trial. Ethan froze. Me? But I'm not a warrior. The Dragon King's eyes glowed brighter. That is why you might succeed. Ethan backed away, his heart racing. He bowed once more and hurried out of the temple. Behind him, the Dragon King watched in silence, a faint spark of curiosity in his ancient heart. For the first time in centuries, the great ruler of fire wondered if perhaps the universe still held something worth smiling for. The next day began with a red dawn. The air above Draconix Prime shimmered like glass, and the ground trembled beneath distant thunder. The human camp was almost ready to leave, but Ethan could not sleep. His thoughts were full of the Dragon King's voice and the promise of a trial he did not want. He was only a stable boy, not a warrior or a hero. Yet the Dragon King had chosen him. He kept wondering why. When Captain Lewis Grant saw Ethan walking toward the temple again, he called out, "Where do you think you're going, boy? We're leaving within the hour." Ethan stopped and turned. "The Dragon King asked for me," he said quietly. "He said I have to face his trial." The captain's face darkened. "You're joking. That monster nearly killed me. You wouldn't last a second." "I know," Ethan admitted. "But he told me to come." Some of the soldiers laughed bitterly, thinking he had lost his mind. Others looked away, ashamed that a stable boy had the courage they no longer did. Captain Grant sighed and said, "If you die, it's on you. I won't send anyone after you." Ethan nodded. "I wouldn't ask you to." He took a deep breath and walked away. His steps were small but steady. Behind him, the camp fell silent. Even those who mocked him could not help but watch as the youngest, weakest human walked toward the fiery temple. Inside, the Dragon King waited. He sat upon his throne, his eyes glowing like twin suns. When Ethan entered, the air grew heavy. The Dragon King's voice filled the hall. "You have returned, little human." "Yes, sir," Ethan said. "You told me to come." The Dragon King studied him for a long moment. "All who come here face the trial of truth. You will see what lies within your heart. There is no weapon, no armor, and no escape. Do you accept?" Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "I accept." "Then step forward," said the Dragon King. The floor beneath Ethan's feet glowed with a deep red light. The world around him began to blur. The temple vanished, replaced by endless shadows and glowing embers. The air was still, and yet it felt alive, whispering faint words that he could barely hear. Ethan looked around. He was standing in a wide, empty space, and in front of him appeared a shape himself. The shadow smiled cruelly. "You don't belong here," it said. "You're nothing. A boy who cleans stables, pretending to be brave." Ethan swallowed hard. "Maybe I am nothing," he said. "But I'm still here." The shadow sneered. "You came here to die. You think kindness can save you? The Dragon King will burn you like all the others." Ethan took a step closer. "Maybe, but if I'm going to burn, I'll do it being myself. The shadow's grin faded. The ground beneath it cracked, and it broke apart like smoke in the wind. The air shimmered again, and suddenly Ethan found himself standing in a memory. He was back on Earth, watching his younger self in the spaceport stable. He saw himself cleaning stalls, ignored by everyone. But then he saw the way he smiled when helping a sick animal or offering a hand to a tired worker. He saw small acts of care he had forgotten. A voice echoed around him. It was the Dragon King's, softer now. Strength is not always forged in battle. Sometimes it is born in gentleness. Ethan looked up. Is that the trial? He asked. To see my past? But the voice did not answer. The world shifted again. Now he stood in a storm of fire. Dragons circled above him, roaring in rage. They fell one by one, fighting each other. Their cries filled the air with sorrow. He saw the Dragon King among them, young and full of fury. The flames devoured everything until only the king remained, surrounded by ash and silence. Ethan's heart ached. He understood now why the Dragon King was sad. He had lost his kin to war and pride. You're alone, Ethan whispered into the fire. That's why you made the trial. You wanted someone to understand. The flames roared brighter, and a great shadow rose before him. The Dragon King himself, but larger than before, his eyes blazing. What do you see, human? The voice thundered. I see pain, Ethan said. I see someone who's been strong for too long. The Dragon King lowered his head. And what will you do with that truth? Ethan thought for a moment. I can't fix what's gone, but maybe I can make you smile again. There was silence. Then the flames began to fade. The heat lessened, and the world turned back into the temple. Ethan stood once more before the Dragon King, breathing hard but unharmed. The Dragon King gazed down at him. No one has ever spoken those words to me. For centuries, I have waited for a heart that could see beyond the fire. You have done so. Ethan smiled weakly. Does that mean I passed? The Dragon King's mouth curved slightly, almost into a smile. Not yet. The trial is not complete. You have seen truth. But can you bring laughter into sorrow? That is the final test. Ethan blinked in surprise. Laughter? You want me to make you laugh? The Dragon King leaned forward, his golden eyes glowing. If you can remind me of joy, human, then you will pass. Ethan looked up at the enormous creature and said softly, I'll try, but I'm not very funny. The Dragon King's deep voice rumbled with quiet amusement. We shall see. And as the lava light flickered around them, a small spark of hope began to glow in the heart of the Dragon King, the first in 1,000 years. The morning after Ethan faced the visions, the sky over Draconix Prime was darker than before. Thick clouds of smoke drifted over the mountains, glowing red from the rivers of fire below. The human camp was almost ready to leave, but Captain Lewis Grant kept pacing near the ships. He could not stop thinking about the boy who had walked into the temple and never returned. Some of the soldiers whispered that the Dragon King had devoured him. Others said the king had turned him into ash. But in the captain's heart, he felt a strange worry that was not about fear or failure. It was about the boy's courage. Inside the temple, Ethan was still alive. The heat pressed against his skin, and his legs trembled from exhaustion. He had passed through strange trials of shadow and fire, and now he stood before the Dragon King once more. The great creature's eyes were softer now, not as sharp as before. They held curiosity, even respect. You have seen truth, said the Dragon King. Now comes the second part of your trial, the trial of spirit. You must teach an old heart to remember joy. Ethan frowned slightly. Teach you to laugh? I don't think I can do that. You're kind of terrifying. The Dragon King's deep chest rumbled, almost like distant thunder. That is why it is a trial, little human. Fire is easy to summon. Laughter is not. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck, thinking hard. He looked around the massive hall, with its burning pillars and rivers of lava. You know, he said, this place could use some color, maybe some plants or lights that aren't trying to melt people. The Dragon King tilted his head. Plants would burn. Not if you turn down the heat a bit, Ethan said. You've been keeping it hot for centuries. Maybe it's time to open a window. The Dragon King blinked, uncertain how to respond. Then, for the first time, a faint puff of smoke escaped his nostrils that almost sounded like a sigh or a laugh. Ethan smiled. See? That's better already. The Dragon King lowered his head until his eyes were level with Ethan. Tell me, human, why do you try to jest before one who could end your life in a single breath? Ethan thought for a moment. Because life's short, and because maybe no one's ever tried to make you smile before. The Dragon King's gaze lingered on him. For a long time, neither spoke. Then, with a wave of his massive claw, he summoned a vision between them. Fire and smoke formed the shapes of people, warriors, rulers, and kings. Each one bowed before him in ages past. They all came with pride, he said. None dared speak to me as you do. Ethan watched the fiery images dance and fade. Maybe that's the problem, he said softly. They all came to prove they were better. I just came because you asked. The Dragon King was silent. The sound of crackling fire filled the air. Then he said, You are either very wise or very foolish. Ethan grinned. I'm a stable boy. I think it's mostly foolishness. A low rumble rolled through the temple again. This time it was unmistakable. The Dragon King was laughing. The sound was deep and rough, shaking dust from the ceiling. Lava splashed against the walls, glowing brighter. Ethan stepped back, startled, then started laughing too. Felt strange, laughing in a place of fire and stone, but it also felt right. When the laughter faded, the Dragon King's voice softened. It has been many centuries since such a sound filled this hall. You have done what warriors, mages, and kings could not. Ethan smiled shyly. Guess I just talked too much. The Dragon King shook his head slowly. No, you listen. That is rarer. A moment of peace settled between them. The firelight dimmed, turning golden instead of red. Ethan sat down on a rock, feeling the warmth beneath him. He looked up at the giant dragon. Can I ask you something? The Dragon King nodded. You may. Why do you keep giving this trial? If everyone keeps failing, what's the point? The Dragon King closed his eyes for a moment. Long ago, my kind believed strength was all that mattered. We fought, we conquered, and we burned. But our pride destroyed us. I gave this trial to seek one who could show me another way, to prove that the universe still holds kindness and laughter. Until now, none had done so. Ethan was quiet for a moment. I think you just needed a friend, he said finally. The Dragon King's eyes opened again. A friend, he repeated, as if the word itself were foreign. Perhaps that is true. Ethan stood. Then maybe this isn't really a trial anymore. Maybe it's just a meeting. The Dragon King studied him for a long time, then gave a slow nod. You may be right, Ethan Cole of Earth. But the ritual must end as it was written. There is one final step. Ethan's smile faded. Final step? Yes, said the Dragon King. To complete the trial, you must face me one last time. Not with blade or flame, but with your heart. If you can stand before me without fear, then you will have truly passed. Ethan took a deep breath. All right, he said softly. I'll try. The Dragon King rose to his full height, his wings spreading wide, filling the hall with light and heat. The ground shook beneath him. Ethan looked up, his body trembling, but he didn't step back. He stood firm. In his eyes, there was no challenge, only understanding. And as the Dragon King looked down at the boy, he felt something stir within his ancient soul. A memory of peace, of friendship, and of laughter long lost. For the first time in 1,000 years, the great ruler of fire was not a judge, but a companion. Ethan stood quietly before the Dragon King as the air around them glowed brighter. The giant creature's wings stretched across the temple, scattering embers like stars. The ground shook with the beat of his heart, yet there was no anger in his eyes, only something deep and searching. Ethan could feel the heat against his skin, but he refused to step back. He had faced fear before, though never one this big. The Dragon King lowered his massive head. You do not flee, he said slowly. Do you not fear me, Little human? Ethan's voice trembled but stayed steady. I was scared at first, but not now. You're not trying to hurt me. The Dragon King's great eyes narrowed. You have seen death and fire. Why do you believe I would spare you? Ethan shrugged. Because if you wanted to destroy me, you would have done it already. I think you're tired of destroying things. For a long moment, the Dragon King said nothing. His claws scraped against the stone floor, and his tail moved slowly through the lava. You see much for one so small, he said at last. Perhaps too much. Ethan smiled weakly. I just try to look with my heart. It's easier than thinking too hard. The Dragon King made a sound like a quiet rumble of laughter. Your heart, he said, is both your greatest strength and your greatest danger. Then, without warning, the ground beneath Ethan split open. Lava burst upward, forming pillars of flame that surrounded him. The heat was unbearable. The Dragon King's voice echoed through the fire. This is the final test, human. Not of your mind or spirit, but of your heart. Stand or fall, your choice. Ethan covered his face with his arm, coughing as smoke filled his lungs. The fire roared like a storm, and the ground trembled under his feet. His legs wanted to run, his body screamed to flee, but he stayed. He remembered the sadness in the Dragon King's eyes, the loneliness he had seen in his memories. He realized this wasn't a test of power. It was a test of faith. I'm not leaving, he shouted through the flames. You're not my enemy. The fire rose higher, wrapping around him like a wall. His clothes smoked, and sweat poured down his face. Still, he stood firm. I won't fight you, he said again. I'm not afraid anymore. The fire flickered and then slowly began to fade. The pillars sank back into the lava rivers, and the smoke cleared. When the air settled, Ethan was still standing, shaking but alive. The Dragon King lowered his great head until his golden eye was level with Ethan's face. You did not run, the Dragon King said softly. Even when the fire sought to claim you. Ethan wiped his forehead with his sleeve. Because I knew you wouldn't really hurt me. You just wanted to see if I'd trust you. The Dragon King blinked slowly. And did you? Ethan nodded. Yeah, I think you've been alone for too long. You wanted someone to trust you again. For the first time, the Dragon King looked away. His great chest rose and fell with a deep, rumbling breath. Once, there were many who trusted me, he said. I led them to war and they died for my pride. Since then, I have found no peace. Ethan looked at him, his voice soft. You don't have to be alone anymore. You just needed someone to remind you that you still matter. The Dragon King's eyes glowed faintly brighter. And you think you can remind me of that? I can try, Ethan said simply. The Dragon King studied him for a long while. Then, with a movement as gentle as a breeze, he lowered his huge claw and touched it to the ground beside Ethan. Then take this, Ethan, coal of earth. The fire that once destroyed shall now protect. A small flame rose from the ground and wrapped around Ethan's wrist. It didn't burn, it felt warm, alive. When it faded, a faint golden mark remained on his skin, glowing softly. Ethan stared at it in awe. What is it? The flame of kinship, said the Dragon King. A gift from my heart to yours. Wherever you walk, the dragons of old shall know you as one of their own. Ethan smiled, his eyes bright with wonder. Thank you. But I don't think I deserve something so big. The Dragon King's voice rumbled gently. You earned it. You gave me something greater in return. Ethan looked up. What's that? The Dragon King's golden eyes softened. Laughter. For a long time, the two stood in silence. The fires of Draconix Prime burned quietly around them, no longer violent but calm, as if the world itself was at peace. Ethan sat down on a rock and looked up at the dragon. So, what happens now? The Dragon King looked toward the distant horizon, where black mountains met a glowing red sky. Now I rest, he said, and you return to your people. Tell them that the Dragon King no longer seeks warriors. Tell them he seeks friends. Ethan smiled softly. I will. The Dragon King lowered his head until his snout was close to the boy. Farewell, little human. You have passed the trial. Ethan reached out and gently touched the side of the Dragon King's nose. The scales were warm, like the surface of a star. "Goodbye, old friend," he whispered. And as he walked out of the temple, the great dragon watched him go, a quiet smile glowing in his eyes, the first in 1,000 years. Ethan walked away from the Dragon King's temple, feeling the soft warmth of the golden mark on his wrist. The land of Draconix Prime stretched out before him, vast plains of black stone, glowing rivers of fire, and skies filled with drifting sparks. Every step he took felt heavy, not from fear or pain, but from the weight of what he had just lived through. He turned once more toward the mountain where the Dragon King rested, a faint smile crossing his face. The path ahead led him back to the valley where the human camps were set up. The other warriors had long given up the trial, believing the Dragon King to be impossible to please. When Ethan finally reached the edge of the valley, he saw the men and women gathered around campfires, sharpening weapons and whispering about defeat. When they saw Ethan approaching, the whispers stopped. His clothes were burned, his face covered with dust, but his eyes glowed with quiet peace. "Is he alive?" one soldier asked in disbelief. "He was just a stable boy," another muttered. "How could he have survived?" Captain Harris, a tall man with gray streaks in his beard, stepped forward. "Ethan," he said carefully, "did you face the Dragon King?" Ethan nodded. "Yes, sir." The crowd leaned closer. "And," Harris asked, "did you pass the trial?" Ethan looked down at his wrist, where the faint golden flame still glowed. "I think so," he said softly. "But it wasn't a test of strength. It was about trust and kindness." The soldiers exchanged confused glances. "Kindness?" someone scoffed. "The Dragon King burned armies alive. What kindness could he want?" Ethan smiled. "The kind that helps you forgive yourself." There was silence for a moment. The people looked at him, trying to understand. Harris frowned, crossing his arms. "Then where is he now? Did you defeat him?" Ethan shook his head. "No one can defeat the Dragon King. But I think he doesn't want to fight anymore." The captain's face hardened. "You mean he's still alive?" "Yes," Ethan said. "And he told me to tell you all something." Harris raised an eyebrow. "And what is that?" Ethan took a deep breath. "He said the Dragon King no longer seeks warriors. He seeks friends." The crowd murmured. Some laughed, some frowned, and a few stared at him with wonder. Harris sighed and turned away. "A dragon wanting friends. You've gone mad, boy." But as he walked past, something bright caught his eye. The golden mark on Ethan's wrist shimmered faintly, casting a soft light across the camp. The soldiers froze. The light pulsed gently, like a heartbeat. "What is that?" one woman whispered. Ethan looked at it. "A gift," he said. "He called it the Flame of Kinship. It means the dragons will know me as one of their own." The camp fell silent again. Then, far above them, a low rumble filled the sky. People looked up to see shadows moving through the clouds, massive, winged shapes gliding silently in the red light of the sun. The dragons had returned. The soldiers scrambled for their weapons, shouting in fear. But Ethan raised his hands. "No, don't," he called out. "They're not here to fight." The largest of the dragons landed on a cliff nearby, its scales shining like molten gold. It lowered its head toward Ethan, the same glow in its eyes as the Dragon King's. For a moment, the entire valley was quiet. Ethan stepped forward. The dragon's breath blew hot across his face, but he didn't move back. He simply raised his marked wrist. The golden light brightened. The dragon gave a deep, calm growl, then folded its wings. "They know you," whispered one of the soldiers. Ethan smiled softly. "They know we're not enemies anymore." One by one, the dragons settled across the cliffs, their presence no longer terrifying but majestic. The humans stared in awe as the creatures watched silently, like guardians rather than conquerors. Captain Harris turned to Ethan, his voice quiet. "You really did it," he said. "You changed them." Ethan shook his head. "No, Captain. I just reminded them what peace feels like." As night fell, The dragons lit the sky with gentle streams of fire, not as weapons, but as lights. The soldiers gathered around their campfires, whispering stories about the boy who faced the Dragon King and lived. Some said he was blessed. Others said he carried the spirit of the dragons within him. Ethan sat quietly, looking at the stars beyond the smoke. The mark on his wrist glowed softly, keeping him warm in the cool night air. He knew the world had changed that day, not through battle or victory, but through understanding. In the distance, the deep rumble of the Dragon King's laughter echoed faintly across the mountains. It was a sound not of rage, but of peace. Ethan smiled, knowing his friend was still watching. And for the first time in 1,000 years, the land of Draconix Prime slept under a calm and gentle sky. Days passed after Ethan's return to the camp. The soldiers began to relax, and the air of fear slowly faded from Draconix Prime. The dragons still circled above the mountains, but they no longer attacked. Instead, they flew together in wide arcs across the glowing skies, sometimes landing far away to rest. The humans watched in silence, unsure if they were dreaming or witnessing the start of something new. Ethan spent most of his time near the cliffs, staring at the horizon where the Dragon King's temple stood hidden behind the clouds. The golden mark on his wrist still glowed faintly, pulsing like a small heartbeat. He felt its warmth whenever the dragons were near, as if the king himself was keeping watch. One morning, Captain Harris came to him. The man's usual stern face looked softer than before. "Ethan," he said, sitting beside him on a rock. "The men want to leave. They think the mission is over." Ethan nodded slowly. "It is over. The war's done. The Dragon King doesn't want to fight anymore." Harris looked out at the sky. "And what about you? What will you do now?" Ethan smiled faintly. "I think I'll stay for a while. The dragons trust me now. Maybe I can learn from them." The captain chuckled quietly. "A stable boy becoming an ambassador to dragons. Never thought I'd see the day." Ethan grinned. "Neither did I." They sat together in silence, watching a group of smaller dragons soar through the clouds like birds. One of them, a silver-scaled creature with bright blue eyes, broke away from the group and glided down toward them. Harris stiffened and reached for his sword, but Ethan raised a hand. "It's all right," he said softly. "He's not going to hurt us." The silver dragon landed gently on the cliff, folding its wings neatly. It lowered its head, sniffing the air curiously. Ethan stepped forward and held up his marked wrist. The dragon's eyes glowed faintly, and it made a low rumbling sound that felt almost like a greeting. Harris stared in disbelief. "It's bowing to you." Ethan reached out and touched the dragon's snout. The scales were cool and smooth beneath his fingers. "Hello there," he whispered. The dragon blinked slowly and gave a soft huff of smoke that made Ethan laugh. The captain shook his head, smiling despite himself. "You really did make them your friends." Ethan nodded. "It's what the Dragon King wanted." That night, the camp gathered around a large fire. The humans told stories about the ancient dragons, but now they spoke with respect instead of fear. They shared food, laughter, and quiet songs that echoed across the mountains. The dragons, resting nearby, listened in silence, their eyes glowing like lanterns in the dark. As the stars appeared overhead, Ethan lay on his back, looking at the sky. He thought of his old life, the stables, the long days of work, the dreams he never dared to chase. Now, he was living something greater than he had ever imagined. He had faced the Dragon King and left not as a hero of war, but as a bridge between worlds. In the middle of the night, the mark on his wrist began to glow brighter. Ethan sat up, sensing something. The wind shifted, carrying a faint sound, a deep, calm voice whispering through the mountains. "Ethan Cole," it said, "you have done well." Ethan's heart leapt. "Dragon King," he called softly. The wind stirred again, and the voice replied, "Peace has returned, but the balance is fragile. Guard it well." "I will," Ethan whispered. "I promise." The voice faded like smoke in the breeze, leaving behind a strange quiet. Ethan looked up at the stars again, feeling both small and strong. He understood that his task was not over. The Dragon King's gift was not just for him. It was for the future. When morning came, the humans began packing their gear, ready to return home. Some bowed their heads to the dragons before leaving, while others waved shyly. The dragons watched them depart, silent but peaceful. Harris walked up to Ethan one last time. "We're heading back to Earth," he said. "You sure you don't want to come?" Ethan shook his head. "Not yet. Someone has to stay and make sure the peace holds." Harris smiled and offered his hand. "Then good luck, son. The world could use more people like you." Ethan shook his hand firmly. "Thank you, Captain." As the human ships rose into the sky, Ethan turned back toward the mountains. The silver dragon from before was waiting for him. He climbed onto its back carefully, holding onto one of the ridges near its neck. With a single beat of its wings, the dragon lifted him high into the air. The wind rushed past his face as they soared above the clouds. Below them, the land of Draconix Prime glowed with soft light, no longer a place of fire and war, but of life. Ethan laughed freely, the sound carrying into the endless sky, and somewhere in the distance, deep within his temple, the Dragon King smiled once more. Years passed since Ethan Cole first faced the Dragon King's trial. The story of the human stable boy who made a dragon laugh spread across the stars like a song. On every world of the human alliance, people whispered his name with wonder and pride. Some said he was chosen by the dragons. Others said he was a fool who dared to be kind. But all agreed that he had changed the galaxy in a way no warrior ever could. Ethan stayed on Draconix Prime, building a small home near the cliffs where the dragons often rested. The once fiery world had grown calm. Rivers of lava still flowed, but now they glowed softly at night, lighting the land like golden veins. The dragons watched over him and the few humans who came to visit. They no longer hid from one another. Every morning, Ethan woke to the sound of wings beating across the sky. The silver dragon, whom he had named Salas, had become his closest friend. Together they explored the valleys, searched for hidden caves, and learned the ancient songs of the dragons. Ethan discovered that dragons did not speak only with words. They spoke with their hearts, through flame and memory. One evening, as the sun sank into the molten horizon, Ethan stood by the edge of the cliff, the warm wind blowing through his hair. The golden mark on his wrist still glowed faintly. He knew it was the Dragon King's way of reminding him that their bond remained. As he gazed into the distance, he felt a familiar warmth deep within his chest. Then he heard the voice again, the same calm, powerful voice that had once filled the mountains. "Ethan Cole," it said, gentle as the breeze. "The time has come." Ethan's eyes widened. Dragon King. A great shadow moved across the sun. From the clouds above, a figure of pure light descended, the spirit of the Dragon King, his form made of fire and gold. He landed softly on the cliff before Ethan, his eyes glowing with ancient peace. "You have kept the flame alive," said the Dragon King. "The bond between our kinds grows stronger each year. You have done what even I could not." Ethan bowed his head. "I just did what felt right. You were never the monster everyone thought you were." The Dragon King's deep voice rumbled like thunder, but it carried warmth. "And you were never just a boy. You were the heart I had forgotten." For a moment, they stood in silence, watching the last rays of sunlight turn the sky red and gold. Ethan felt tears sting his eyes. "Will you leave again?" he asked softly. The Dragon King nodded slowly. "My time in this world fades, but my flame will remain. It lives in you, and in those who believe as you do. As long as humans remember kindness, dragons will never vanish." Ethan swallowed hard. "Then I'll make sure they never forget." The Dragon King's form began to shimmer, dissolving into thousands of glowing sparks that drifted upward into the night sky. "Goodbye, Ethan Cole," he said, his voice fading. "You made me smile again." As the last of the light disappeared into the stars, Ethan stood quietly, watching until the air grew still. Salas landed beside him, lowering its head in silent respect. Ethan reached out and touched its scales gently. "He's gone," he whispered. "But he'll always be here." The dragon gave a soft rumble of agreement, pressing its forehead against Ethan's chest. The golden mark on his wrist brightened, then faded back to a gentle glow. From that day onward, Ethan became the keeper of the flame of kinship. Humans and dragons visited his home to learn from him, to understand the lessons of peace, laughter, and courage that he carried. He taught them that strength did not come from fighting, but from understanding, that true victory was when both sides could stand together without fear. As the years rolled on, Ethan grew older, his hair turning gray, but his spirit never dimmed. When he finally passed away, the dragons lit the skies with fire, creating a river of light that stretched across the stars. They called it the Path of the Heart, and from that night on, it was said that if one looked closely enough, they could see a small figure riding beside a golden dragon, laughing as they soared among the constellations. And so the legend lived on, the story of the stable boy who faced a god, not with a sword, but with a smile. His name was Ethan Cole, and in every world that told his tale, people remembered what the Dragon King had learned from him, that even in the darkest fire, a little laughter can save a soul.